And welcome to the final phase of Countdown 2019 on Nigeria Info 99.3, where we feature all the big and significant issues on the road to the 2019 handover at the presidential and governorship level, the election of National Assembly and State Assembly leadership, and appointment of ministers and commissioners. Remember, you can follow the program on Twitter at Countdown 2019NG, at Rotimi Sankore, and at Ahoho Obo. And you can tweet at us at the station handle at Nigeria Info FM. Our big topic today on both the idea segment with Ayobe and on the main program, are local governments finally going to get their rightful financial autonomy? The National Financial Intelligence Unit has recommended that the joint state local government accounts can only be used to receive money, and that local government funds can only be disbursed after they have reached the rightful local government account and only for local government purposes. The deadline for implementation is June 1. So we start with that with Ayo. She will help us clarify what the Constitution says as well as her informed and educated opinion on these recommendations. And shortly after, we will engage you, our wonderful listeners.
Actually, hello listeners, and hello Rotimi. It's great to be here, but what I'm going to be doing in the ideas segment is actually looking to see what do these new regulations mean of the NFIU mean in terms of integrity, in terms of democracy, ethics, and accountability. So I'm happy to explain other things
what the Constitution says
afterwards. Yes. But the essential point is that the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit, which is what the NFIU stands for, has proposed some guidelines, and it's also proposed some penalties for breach of the guidelines. Now, at the moment, we don't know whether these guidelines are going to actually have effect. There's some suggestion that the state governments are likely to challenge the legality of the guidelines, or to say that the NFIU is going outside its remit. But
which is where the constitutional issues come in.
But let's, in terms of our ideas approach, let's look at whether or not we think that these guidelines, if they are in fact lawful, if they are in fact implemented, are they going to have an impact on issues like integrity, ethics, and particularly on accountability? And of course, when we look at those in the round, we then see, are they having any impact at all on our democracy? Because as you know, at the moment we have a situation where we are supposed to have three autonomous spheres of government: the federal, the state, and the local. And just as the state governments complain, they used to complain at the beginning of the Fourth Republic that the federal government was treating them as though they were some kind of inferior body simply because they were smaller, and that they had to take orders and instructions from the federal government. And any institutions that were set up for the federation, which includes them, were being treated by the federal government as its own. And it's the same complaint that the local governments have with regard to the state governments, that the state governments also treat the local governments as though we are bigger than you and therefore we're more important. And anything that you want to do has to go through us. And the point is that what this ends up doing is it ends up making local governments really not a democratically accountable part of the governance of this country.
Or often ineffective.
Well, I mean, because they would say that they're not accountable. They don't control their funds, and therefore they can't be held accountable for the way those funds are spent.
Talking about the funds, can we just touch briefly on what the revenue sharing formula is, so for those listeners that don't know. So every month, the federal government grabs some
No.
people would
First
say-
of all, before we start talking about what is grabbed, we need to also be aware of what goes in. Because the money that is spent by the states and the local governments is not the only money that they get. Okay, so there's money that goes into the federation account, and it's from there that we're talking about this sharing formula.
Okay, so before I talk about the sharing formula, you can tell us about...
No, as I said, the point is that just as you have states talking about internally generated revenue, you also have local governments talking about their own internally generated revenue. That's why they keep on coming up with these ideas that if you put up an advertisement or a signpost outside your office, you have to come and pay for it.
Okay,
Now,
so the IGR of the local government and state is different from what is shared.
yes.
That's the
What
point.
it knows from what is shared from the federation account. Now,
Okay.
the money that goes into the federation account is that the federal government takes 52.68% from the federation account. The states, the 36 states, share 26.72%, according to a formula that is also worked out. And then the local governments get 20.60%. That's the 774 local governments. Now, as you know, many states have tried to increase the number of local governments that they have. And in Lagos State, for example, we have a grand total, I think, of 57 local council development areas. And they were all, they've been in office since July 2017. So, but officially, Lagos State only has a certain number of local governments, and so far, the increase has not taken effect.
And then this 20.60% for all the 774 local governments. The allegation sometimes is that the local governments don't even get them or don't get all of it because the state governments
Yes.
sit on it or decide that they are in charge of it.
Well, what the state governments do is that they say, yes, we know that, for example, let's say payment of primary school teachers or repair of potholes in roads. We know that it's the job of the local governments, but because we're bigger, we can do economies of scale. We can,
So the
we are
state
more
governments
effective.
do.
And so we will spend the money on behalf of the local governments. And you know, that's why, I mean, as I left my office at Boyle Street, and it was all shake, rattle and roll as we were going down, you know, to get to the, even to get onto Awolowo Road and so on. The condition of the Boyle Street, you would say that, well, is anybody attending to this? And so anybody that lives in Lagos would know that there's no journey that they undertake that doesn't involve some shake, rattle and roll because of the very poor condition of even the local roads before we get to the state roads and the federal roads. And as you know, some state governments become so concerned about the poor quality of the federal roads in the state that they undertake the repairs themselves. And because they do the repair, they then say to the federal government, you owe us this money, you need to repay it. Now, as to whether that happens with the local governments.
But the other big issue about this financial intelligence unit recommendation also has to do with how money is withdrawn.
Yes.
So,
Well, the Financial Intelligence Unit said that they noticed that large amounts of what ought to go to local governments are being withdrawn in cash.
by state governments.
They're being withdrawn in cash.
By state governments.
I don't necessarily say that because I don't know that it's only state governments that withdraw in cash. But the point is that the amounts are going out in cash. And that by itself is a red flag. Whether it's the state governments or the local governments, to be frank, it's a red flag that why should an arm of government be spending cash? It's something that...
So they've put a cap on it.
Yes, they put a cap on the amount that can be taken out every day.
Yeah, 500,000.
I mean, that 500,000, that's $500,000 a day, which to you and I might not be small potatoes. And of course, when you have this sort of blanket thing in a federation where the cost of living varies from one part of the federation to another, you will find that it could, if there are legitimate reasons for needing cash, then it could act as a draw. But I think that the essential point is that we ought to be able to trace where the money goes, and for that, the transactions should be by check or online transfer.
But in addition, they say that the money can also should only be withdrawn from an actual local government account.
Yes.
So the federal government will send to the joint account, and then the money will go to the account of each local government to prevent the state government from having direct access to it.
Now, what the Constitution says is that each state shall maintain a special account to be called State Joint Local Government Account. I'm reading from Section 162, subsection 6. Into which shall be paid all allocations to the local government councils of the state from the federation account and from the government of the state. So the state government can also make some allocation to its local governments. And then it says, each state shall pay, this is subsection 7, each state shall pay to local government councils in its area of jurisdiction such proportion of its total revenue on such terms and in such manner as may be prescribed by the National Assembly. And then it says that the amount standing to the credit of local government councils of a state shall be distributed among the local government councils of that state on such terms and in such manner as may be prescribed by the House of Assembly of the state. So at one level, well, I mean, if we have independent minded legislators, that would be one thing, but we don't. Equally, we don't really have enough independent-minded local government chairs. And, you know, even in Lagos State, I'm sure that very few of us know who our local government chairs are. I happen to have the list of the people who were sworn in July 2017. But really, the turnout for the elections of local governments are very low. People hardly pay attention to who is standing and who is
But the whole point of this is that after June 1, that is shortly after the president and the governors have been sworn in, that corruption, which is being flagged, should reduce when this kicks in, and that the local governments can then be held accountable.
Well, I think that's really the point.
For any money that they are spending, and in turn for their performance.
Because at the moment, there can be a bit of buck passing going on. The state government can be saying, the local governments should be paying teachers' salaries. And the local governments can be saying, well, we would pay teachers' salaries, but the state government is sitting on our money. So the buck passing aspect of it would need to come to a stop if these regulations come into effect. But in the end, if we are not actually keeping an eye on what our local governments are doing, then we're probably not going to get the anti-corruption effect that this is supposed to bring about.
I mean, there is also a security dimension, because the statement from the NFIU says cash withdrawal and transactions, that's what is happening now. Cash withdrawals and transactions from the state's joint local government accounts pose the biggest corruption, money laundering and security threats at the grassroots level.
Yes.
In other words, that across the states, all those large ungoverned spaces
Yes.
where bandits and extremists take over, one of the reasons for this is that the local government don't exist.
Yes.
And people just step in and fill the vacuum and just take over.
And in fact, one should recognize, I mean, this is quite some time ago, but I remember somebody from a northern state coming to my law partner, who's, as you know, is involved in politics. And he was, we were sort of having some minor complaints, what seemed to him minor complaints about our local government. And he was saying, oh, you even have people to turn up. Where I am, the local government chair appears every quarter, collects the money that is allocated to his local government, distributes a little bit among the councillors, of course his deputy, local government chair, gets something, pays some of the arrears of salary if he feels like it, and then you don't see them again for the next 3 months until the allocation is due to land. So that the lack of accountability is almost it's palpable.
And that's where the security threat.
And in fact, that's why some of the headlines about this story say new rules to protect local government funds from governors, and which just shows that the relationship in which the governors stand to these funds is that they're seen as rapacious and interloping marauders.
Yeah, so while the EFCC focuses mainly at the federal and state level, the local governments.
Well,
really
now
have
that the money is going to, if these measures take effect, the local government will be accountable, and of course, as I said, that by itself is not necessarily going to prevent corruption. It's when we, as members of a local government community, decide to start holding our local government elected representatives, that is our councillors and our chairs and their deputy, their vice chairs, to accountable for what they're doing, and to say to them, this road, what's going on? Why hasn't it been fixed?
But if this then happens, the buck passing becomes difficult, because the money can only actually be withdrawn from the local government account.
I agree.
And only then to...
I agree with you. I mean, buck passing becomes difficult. But if the person on whose table the buck lands said, so what? I have the buck. What are you going to do about it? If you can find me, then that by itself, I say, it really requires us as citizens. It requires us as citizens to wake up, smell the coffee, and start to also hold these people accountable, rather than seeing it as whatever the state government wants to do, they can do with it. So yes, I think that from an ideas point of view, it can have an impact, but we shouldn't be complacent about saying it will automatically have the impact that we want it to have in ideas terms.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Ayobe.
Well, can I just ask our listeners to please continue to check us out on our website at www.ideasradio.ng, and also to follow us on Twitter at ideasradioNG. And of course, you can